All right, so we made it to Unit 2, yay us, the biological basis of behavior. And this picture here is a nod to phrenology, which you'll recall that your book talked about, is a pseudoscience where people would sort of feel the curvature and the bumps of the head in order to predict some personality traits. And I say that it's a pseudoscience because it's not a real science, but it was people's earliest and earnest attempt to understand the human mind. So let's start with the why. It might be weird for some of you guys to try to wrap your head around the fact that we are now talking about neurons and the central nervous system, and you're in a psychology class. And so perhaps this topic thrills you, you love bio and anatomy, and perhaps you're thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't sign up for a science class. The thing is, while this may not be your favorite thing to study throughout the year, understanding what's happening to us on a biological level when we're studying mental process is incredibly important, okay? We can't analyze human behavior or understand how the human mind processes information or how it is that we learn without at least having some like basic knowledge of what's going on beyond the surface, okay? So if this is a bit out of your comfort zone, bear with us and do know that this is to serve a greater purpose of understanding the human mind. All right, so we're gonna start small and work our way big. And the smallest way to start is by looking at a neuron. A neuron is a nerve cell and it's the building block of the nervous system. I'm really looking forward to seeing the way that you guys designed your neuron models. And so do, as you're studying, be looking for ways to sort of memorize these parts in a way that seems meaningful for you, all right? Dendrites, these are the things that receive information from other neurons or other cells. The axon passes that message down to the terminal branches, which are enable it to pass the message on. The myelin sheath is that sort of like fatty material that covers the axon. The cell body, you think about it like a nucleus of the cell. And kind of that center, support center. So be thinking about whatever way works for you. Neurons are just something that you gotta know. All right, so I thought we would start by looking at a famous quote from Legally Blonde where Reese Witherspoon, aka Elle Woods, is in a law school class. I believe I should have like rewatched this movie before I talked about it. But she says here she's trying to argue against somebody that she knows and likes having committed murder against her husband. And the line here is that exercise gives you endorphins. Endorphins make you happy. Happy people just don't shoot their husbands. They just don't, okay? I'm totally not doing this line justice. So hopefully you know the movie and you can kind of sort of make sense of that. So why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because endorphins are neurotransmitters, and we're going to talk about how neurotransmitters start an action potential in a neuron. Okay, so action potential is a neural impulse, a brief electrical charge that travels down the axon, okay? And so for somebody, it might be after a fantastic run. You're flooded with endorphins, okay? Or it might be when that person that you really like texts you, right? And you're flooded with dopamine, okay? So an action potential is this all or nothing response that triggers the release of neurotransmitters throughout your nervous system, okay? So it's triggered by a threshold and it's an all or nothing response, okay? So what does that mean? The way that I think about it, and I'm sure there's a better way, so think about it for yourself, is like flushing a toilet, okay? You can't half flush a toilet. You have a certain threshold of pressure that has to happen for the toilet to flush, and it's all or nothing. It either flushes or it doesn't. If you hate that example, go ahead and just think of one on your own, something that it's all or nothing. Okay, and once there's an action potential, the central nervous system needs a rest, okay? And so there's a period of inactivity. You can't be flooded with dopamine constantly or flooded with endorphins constantly. The body just can't sustain that. All right, so how do neurons communicate? Neurons communicate when a neurotransmitter is released and the dendrites pick it up, send it down the axon and to the axon terminals, and they send it to another neuron. And you can see right here, this is going to be pretty important. This is this a diagram of how each neuron kind of comes in this close but like actually not touching contact with each other and release the neurotransmitters to the next neuron. Okay, this here is the synaptic gap. This is the like I'm touching you, not touching you sort of proximity that they have together, and they release the neurotransmitters from one to the next. And just note, not every action potential is as strong as another one. So some are very strong, they go for much longer. Some are weak and might go for much shorter. But do understand that they communicate via this synaptic gap where they're able to release that neurotransmitter to the next neuron down the line. Reiterates everything that we just talked about. Okay, the synapse or the synaptic gap is this space right here where the neurons meet as close as possible to release the neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter are these chemical messages that cross the synapse. And do note that there's this thing called reuptake, and that's a neurotransmitter's reabsorption by the sending neuron. Okay, so AKA what happens after the action potential. So here's just a short list of the many neurotransmitters that exist. We'll do something more with this later in class. Some of the sort of most well-known are the adrenaline, the fight or flight. So if I was in class, for instance, I might slam something against the wall and you would get that sort of like that scared feeling, the heart races, you're looking around to see if there's danger, and you would feel your body come back to homeostasis, right? And that would be an action potential. Your body would be pushing adrenaline through your body. Dopamine is pleasure, things that make us feel good. Social media is actually when you get a particular amount of likes or a comment from a person that we really like, there's the same sort of dopamine that's being released in the brain as when we, let's say, use a drug, which is why perhaps technology, video games can be just as addicting to people. Endorphins, these are those things that make us feel good, usually released during exercise or some kind of excitement. Serotonin is our mood. We're going to talk about that a little bit more as well. Okay, so let's talk about serotonin and as it relates to depression. Okay, so people who do not create a lot of serotonin just naturally are more prone to depression. Depression's more complex than just a neurotransmitter. There's many other factors that sort of add to a person's level of happiness or depression. However, serotonin is a big piece of that, and not all of our bodies create the same level of serotonin as other people, okay? And so an SSRI stands for a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and it's basically like a depression drug, for to say it sort of in an uncouth way. So Prozac, Zoloft, Lexapro, Paxil, these drugs are SSRIs. In other words, that they help by blocking the reabsorption of serotonin. That way, serotonin is able to exist in that synapse for a little bit longer and pass it on a little bit more to the next neuron. Okay, so an SSRI may not completely treat depression and it may not work for everyone, but it's certainly a really viable option for people whose depression can be attributed to low levels of serotonin. So just one way that we can see how drugs can actually help to help the body maintain and hold on to some of those neurotransmitters. So since we just talked about serotonin and SSRI drugs, let's just take a moment to talk about drugs and know that we'll come back to this later. So if that's your jam or something that you get excited to learn about, we'll come back to this. Okay, so you do need to know though that there's two types of drugs. There's agonists, and these are drugs that stimulate a response or they make something happen. Okay, and there's antagonists, and these are inhibit or blocks a response. Okay, so a couple of examples here are heroin and Prozac. Right, Prozac helps stimulate the hanging on to of serotonin in the synaptic gap. Heroin causes a rush of dopamine, intense feelings of happiness and euphoria, whereas antagonist drugs like promethazine is a drug used for, I believe, people with schizophrenia, and it actually inhibits dopamine in order to help them stabilize a mood. Or naloxone, which is the anti-drug to heroin. It helps people come down from that high, and it's usually what's given to people by paramedics when they're in the process of overdosing. Okay, so we've talked about a lot here, and I'm going to stop here for today. The big thing to know is to make sure you understand that neurons are these nerve cells that carry neurotransmitters throughout the body. I'm going to just step back here. Really, there we go. And to know that it's neurotransmitters that are sent throughout the body for various reasons based on different stimuli in the environment or within ourselves. Okay, so take some time to really look at these neurotransmitters and come ready to talk about them next week. All right, until then, next up we're going to be talking about the endocrine system. So I will see you back here soon.